The inspector shall inspect the exterior wall covering materials, the eaves, soffit, and fascia, a representative number of windows, all the exterior doors, flashing and trim, adjacent walkways and driveways, stairs, steps, stoops, stairways, and ramps, porches, patios, decks, balconies, and carports, railings, guards, and handrails, and vegetation, surface drainage, and retaining walls and grading around the property where they may adversely affect the structure due to moisture intrusion. The home inspector also should describe the type of exterior wall covering materials, and the home inspector shall report as a need of correction any improper spacing between intermediate balusters, spindles, and rails.
Now we're going to start section 3.2, which is the exterior. It's grounds, exterior of the house, wall cladding, things like that. Just want to point out, you should always look at the boulevard sidewalk. Certain jurisdictions like Denver, it is the homeowner's responsibility to maintain and fix this. So if you have trip hazards, such a thing, the city can tell the homeowner they have to fix it, and it's a pretty expensive problem. You know, coming up the driveway, I would write this driveway up as cracked, settled, trip hazards. It's just not in great shape. As we come into the sidewalk, you know, it looks like they've replaced the porch and part of the sidewalk. That's great. You know, this looks better. Now, downspouts. You know, this is not a great spot for a downspout to discharge. North side of the house, going to be cold. Would have been better if they changed the slope and discharged it over there. I would mention to my clients, you know, this is just going to kind of keep this area icy. This sidewalk could definitely become a slip hazard in the summer or the winter. Okay. There's our gas meter. We have brick veneer cladding, and then we have a fiber siding. You are required to put that in the report. We're required to talk and report on the condition. Now, when we were on the roof, I talked about venting, and I could see somebody had added soffit vents. That might be an indication that we had some ice damming, things like that going on. So we saw a little of that scalloping on the roof. So those weren't original. So I know somebody's added them. The porch looks good. Grading looks pretty good. I would write up the window well for a water resistant load bearing cover for safety, because that's a pretty big fall. We'd also measure it to see if it needs a ladder. Here we have an outside hose faucet, and it looks like we have a tie-in for maybe the sprinkler system. You know, this outside hose faucet, there's no caulking, there's no separation. So this copper line is in direct contact with the brick. It's not loose. This is also not a freeze proof. So I would definitely put a note about that so they shut it off in the winter so it doesn't split and freeze. Okay, our brick veneer. This house is a little early for weep holes in this area. Typically now we want to see a weep hole every 33 inches, but in 1971, they were not doing that here. So little bit of cracking might mean we have a little bit of settlement on this area. With a big window, that's not totally unusual. I would put a note, there was cracks in the brick mortar at the north side above the egress window. I'd put a note about that. Had a little bit of deteriorated mortar here. I'd note that in the report. So far, paint looks pretty good. Trim looks pretty good. Looking, the paint's a little chipped at the caulking, but the caulking for the windows looks good. Now, on this side, I saw we had a gate over here. So we'll get to here, and then we'll work our way around the house that direction. Again, make sure you look at the window well. I always recommend the covers. Okay, on this side of the garage, if you look right here, you can see everything slopes towards the garage. So that's not an ideal situation. You know, we want to see a positive half-inch a foot slope for about the first 10 feet away from the house. So eventually this can cause problems. You know, the good news, it's a garage, so we have a slab right there. If there's a house, a lot of times we'd see a bowed foundation wall there. And then over here, the soil is too high at the siding at the garage. So I would want to write that up because we're required to write up any soil contact, and that soil is just too high. So this side really needs to be cut out and sloped away and basically a swale put in here. Looking up here, remember we talked about the drip edge flashings, gable vent right there. Most areas of the world, you do not mix gable vents and soffit vents for roofing. In Colorado, we see it fairly standard because we have such a sun load that sometimes that's the only way they can get a roof to vent correctly is just having more vents. So it's not completely unusual, but most places you will call it out as a defect if you see a gable vent and soffit vents. Okay, we're going to have to go around because this gate doesn't let us through. Okay, coming to this side with the shed here. Sheds are not part of our standards of practice. We do not inspect sheds. I can't see a lot because of one, the occupant stuff and the shed being right here. So there's a lot I can't see. Here we have a splashback. I would probably still talk to my clients about getting an extension pipe, but they do have something to take the water away. Here I can see the foundation. So on the outside, we're going to see some of it. In the basement, remember, we couldn't really see any of it. Again, I'm going to look at my window caulking. Here we have a little paint chipping, but the window caulking still seems really good. So all in all, the paint looks pretty good. Now, when I see these little things, if you look, there's like 1.5 inches, sometimes there's 2-inch holes. What that tells me is at some point, somebody drilled holes in this siding and usually they blew insulation. So in 1971, we didn't have exterior wall insulation. Somebody's added it now. So that's a good thing. And I might point it out to my clients and say, hey, it looks like somebody's added some exterior wall insulation. We don't know if it was done to everything, but typically when I see those, that's what it tells me. So here, we're getting some cracking. We're getting some moisture damage. I put a note that there was some moisture damage on the siding. Remember, the siding is quite old. It's actually held up pretty good for fibrous siding. Coming through, when we were doing our electrical, we would have checked to make sure this is GFCI protected, everything. Typically, I don't like to see things hooked up like this, but, you know, people like their exterior lighting for their patios, things like that. Again, grading, we're pretty flat here. We don't really slope too much away from the house. We slope a little bit this way, but I would talk to my clients about working on the grading, and I would definitely have it in the report that we have poor grading. Working our way down again, you see the soffit vents. On the back of the garage, we have a small landing here. It looks like somebody's replaced the door and they never trimmed it. So I would put a note that the garage exterior door was not trimmed at the exterior. Here we have our original window. And again, now with the occupant's belongings, so I'd have a note on this, you know, portions of the exterior were not visible due to the occupant's belongings. Back here, fences are not part of a standards of practice. We are not required to inspect fences. But when I see an obvious problem with a fence like this back here, I'm going to write it up as a safety hazard because my clients might have kids, they might have pets, the neighbors might have a dog that's not very nice, and that's not a very secure fence. And, you know, kids playing around it could just get hurt. So I would write up anything that I think would be a safety hazard, even though it's not part of our standard. I don't want to see somebody get hurt on a house that I inspected. Okay, there we're just wrapping up the 3.2, the exterior portion of the house. You know, we did look at a little bit of the foundation here. You know, that kind of leads us into jumping into 3.3, which is foundation, structure, things like that. So let's head to the basement.
Yeah, so these are the, you know, NACHI standards of practice or the minimum standards of practice. You know, typically on the home inspection, the home inspector is actually going to do more, and each home inspection company is a little bit different. For example, every time we'll check the fence and let you know if the fence needs to be serviced. And it's a good question to ask your home inspector. You know, if there's something you see that you're concerned about that you don't see noted on the report, just ask your home inspector, and they usually are pretty friendly and they'll put down as much as they can for you. All right, have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.